For those who recall watching TV or listening to the radio in the 1990s, you'll surely remember Chevy trucks' Like a Rock slogan sung by none other than Bob Seger. Chevrolet hyped up their trucks' ruggedness and durability in those ads, and it really wasn't all hype. By that point in time, Chevrolet had established a reputation for building dependable pickups and people haulers with relatively few Achilles heels aside from the tin worm. Indeed, Chevrolet trucks had been well built for decades and were also good lookers. The third-gen square-body Chevrolet CKs, produced from 1973 to 1991, were generally great trucks made in this vein, outfitted with many different, dependable engines and transmissions. One of the most popular combinations was the Chevrolet 350 V8, backed by a turbo-hydromatic 350 transmission. A less popular but even more rugged combination was the big block Chevrolet 454 backed by a turbo-hydromatic 400 transmission. However, aside from engines and transmissions, the remainder of these trucks were also quite rugged and durable. There was, however, one variation of these third-gen CK trucks that could not be labeled reliable or durable like the other variants, and it was solely because of the engine under hood. In 1978, Chevrolet became the first domestic pickup truck producer to place a V8 diesel in their pickups, but this was not any ordinary diesel V8. Today's diesel pickups often have 300-plus horsepower and over 700 pound-feet of torque, but in 1978, Chevrolet decided to introduce into its pickup line a 120 horsepower, 222 pound-foot of torque, Oldsmobile-sourced 350 cubic inch 5.7 liter V8 engine. It would soon turn out to be a disaster. Although this engine was only available for ordering in two-wheel drive C10 pickups, it still wasn't strong enough to do much of anything the pickup truck owner wanted. Yes, it did have more horsepower and torque than the standard 250 cubic inch inline six-cylinder engine, which had 115 horsepower and 195 pound-feet of torque, but at least one could say that engine was relatively durable and reliable. Unfortunately for Chevy truck buyers who selected the diesel option in 1978, Chevrolet decided to source its diesel engine from Oldsmobile, whose diesel engine's inauspicious beginnings began when launched in that model year not only in Chevrolet pickups, but also in numerous passenger cars, including many Oldsmobiles and even the top-of-the-line Cadillac Seville. Oldsmobile engineers didn't exactly begin this diesel with a clean sheet design and really started with the basic layout of their gas 350 V8 as they developed the first ever diesel engine produced by the division. Though it wasn't a clean sheet design, the Olds diesel did have a number of fundamental changes versus the gas engine, including a much sturdier cast iron block. However, while the block itself was significantly reinforced, one of the major flaws of the early Olds diesels was that they used the same 10-bolt pattern and head bolts as the gasoline-powered Olds 350. This was likely done in order to save tooling costs, but it proved fatal in an engine where compression ratios were 2.5 times that of the gasoline engine. It also likely didn't help that the engine's anemic horsepower ratings forced drivers to operate their vehicles with their foot to the floorboard most of the time, putting high loads on these head bolts, which often stretched or broke, causing the head gaskets to fail. Once the head gaskets failed and coolant seeped into the oil, a whole host of new problems would be introduced into the engine, as the oil would lose its lubricating properties and chew up the engine internals, causing severe damage. Another strange cost-cutting move on the Oldsmobile diesels was that no vehicle in which it was installed was equipped with a water separator. Diesel fuels, especially back then with their formulation, had a particular affinity to attract water. Without this water separator, corrosion could and would occur within the diesel's fuel system, including within fuel lines, injectors, and even the Rusamaster-sourced injection pump. Some Oldsmobile owners tried to get around this issue by putting dry gas in their diesel fuel tanks, and while the solution would seemingly make sense, the dry gas tended to eat up injection pump seals and O-rings as well as the seals within the fuel pumps. However, despite these issues, even when the Olds diesels were operable, they really were not pleasant to drive. Like other diesels of the era, they were relatively noisy and stinky, though a bit less so than some contemporaneous diesel engines like those offered by Mercedes in the era, which emitted an even louder clickety-clack noise as they drove down the roadway. The 120 horsepower that the Olds diesel produced didn't do much to help the engine's reputation, as it was saddled with around 3,700 pounds of pickup to move around, and that was without a payload in the bed or a trailer hitch attached to the back of the truck. At least buyers who selected this engine had it backed by a turbohydromatic 350 transmission and pickups, whereas it was often backed by a turbohydromatic 200 transmission. Yes, that's right, a Chevette-sourced transmission in many passenger cars and even full-size cars. You can imagine the transmission longevity in those vehicles of this turbohydromatic 200 transmission. Also unfortunate for consumers was that the Oldsmobile-sourced V8 continued to find its way under the hood in Chevrolet pickups, not only in the 1978 model year, but also in 1979, 80, and 1981. In 1982, it would be replaced by the Detroit diesel-sourced 6.2-liter V8, which in some cases was better, but it was also quite anemic relative to other gasoline power plants that one could order in the Chevrolet pickup. More specifically, whereas the Olds 350 cubic inch diesel made 120-ish horsepower in Chevrolet pickups during this time, the Detroit diesel-sourced 6.2 made a whopping 130 horsepower. Torque also increased from around 220 to 225 pound-feet of torque to an increased 240 pound-feet of torque with the Detroit diesel 6.2. So what can you do if you find yourself as the owner of one of these Oldsmobile 350 cubic inch Chevrolet pickups or vehicles? Well, the first piece of advice I would have is to change the oil frequently, maybe every 2,000 miles or 2,500 miles. The recommended service interval back in the day was 3,000 miles for these, but many gasoline-powered vehicles had service intervals up to 7,500 miles. Diesel oil gets very dirty very quickly due to the diesel fuel burning and soot particles that result from its combustion. And as a result, the oil becomes contaminated very quickly. The best thing, as I said, you can do is to change the oil frequently, and this was another issue that owners had, is they didn't change the oil frequently enough for what was required in this engine. The second piece of advice I would have is, honestly, make sure that before you drive the vehicle that you let it warm up a little bit, and if you can't do that, you at least drive it gingerly until there's hot heat coming out of the heater outlets. This will allow the block and head to expand at relatively slow rates compared to if you were flooring the engine all the time, and it may help alleviate some head bolt issues. And the third recommendation, if you own one of these vehicles, is just to begin praying to many different deities out there. Don't stick with one deity because it may not be enough to keep this engine running with no troubles. Hope you enjoyed this special on the least reliable Chevrolet pickups. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you.